So here we have a document that really, I think, shows the government's response to the suffrage crisis, you could call it, I guess. And it's essentially a volume that was based around a card catalogue that was a working system in the Home Office, and it covers 1906 to 1914, and it's essentially an index of names of people arrested involved in the suffrage movement. So in this we have about 1,300 names mentioned, so it's showing very much the kind of scale of the movement in that way. And within that you get men and women mentioned from all sorts of different societies, so predominantly because it's arrests, it's looking at the kind of militant side of things, but many of the people mentioned in there were involved in various societies. So many were involved in the Women's Social and Political Union, but might have also been members of the Tax Resistance League, the Actresses Franchise League, things like that. So we get from this one document quite an insight into the varied nature of the movement, how it involved all parts of the country. So it's a really interesting insight from one document into the suffrage movement. So I've got just an example that it's opened up to here, which we can see details relating to the arrest multiple times of Emily Wilding Davison. So although she's known predominantly for dying at some racecourse where she ran out in front of the King's Horse, we can see actually that from 1909 she was already being arrested, so in that instance at Bow Street, but then we've got arrests in Manchester, Newcastle, as well as London as well. So essentially from this record at a glance we can get a sense of some of the famous figures that were involved in the movement, and kind of the multiple arrests they faced, but also some of the less well-known individuals. So it's kind of a document that equalises our view of the movement in some ways. So we get often kind of working class women mentioned in here, and all sorts of kind of varieties of the suffrage movement reflected essentially. Also we've got these numbers which refer to Home Office documents, not all of which survive, but generally there would have been a file on each of these individuals. So again, just showing the kind of mass amount of correspondence that the government had to keep track of these individuals. Essentially the card index was a way of tracing individuals' movements throughout kind of quite a long period, 1906 to 1914, and often names weren't recorded because of disguises and evading the police. So we have like lots of women and arguably men listed as unknown. So I think it really shows the challenge that the government was facing on this kind of ever-evolving movement.
So I guess what we could say is that from these records as well, you can just see how widespread the movement was. I mean, Emily Wilding Davison was recorded as being arrested in central London, Manchester, Newcastle, Aberdeen. So it's not happening in one place, it's happening across the country.
Absolutely, so we can really get a sense of that. So there's probably more of a focus on London than elsewhere, but there is also this real national context, and we can see people travelling and moving around. So someone like Emily Wilding Davison, she's moving specifically for militant actions. So you both get people that would have been based all over the country in different locations, but also people actively moving to where an MP was or a cabinet minister to kind of actively target them with militant actions. So on this particular page we have various individuals listed in this alphabetised index, and what we can see is some of the Pankhurst family. So we have Adela, Christabel, Emmeline, I've got Sylvia as well. So really through this document we can see some of the actions of really some of the leaders of the movement, of the Women's Social and Political Union. And this is from some of the kind of earliest forms of militancy. So Adela is actually one of the earliest to be arrested in 1906, Christabel 1907. And we can actually look, Emmeline Pankhurst obviously a very key figurehead, but actually compared to some individuals, she isn't as arrested as many times as you would necessarily think. I guess what we're looking at is very much at a glance information about these individuals and about their arrests. So what you don't really get a sense of is that Sylvia obviously broke away from the Women's Social and Political Union. So some of these arrests are slightly different, and actually she gets arrested in 1919 and 1920 as well because of her continued agitation that was kind of separate from the other facets of the earlier Votes for Women movement. In general, this was also brought together in this volume in relation to the amnesty on the outbreak of the First World War. So it was really in response to that this particular document was compiled from its original form in the card index into this volume in 1922.